My grandma was in the 80s and 90s was pretty into tech for her era, and she had an old x86 with no hard drive, 5 1/4 floppies, and it broke one day, and I was like 10 or 11, and she was just letting me play on it, and so I went over and fixed it. Um, just there was a command com missing or something like that, and then I started learning like GW Basic and Q Basic on that, um, and that was sort of where I started. My dad worked at Boeing, and he worked on electronics manufacturing at Boeing and also at Hanford. And so that I was really it was always interesting to go into his work and see the electronics manufacturing lines. He introduced me to electronics, and between him and my grandma, it was a lot of early exposure to electronics and technology that got me fascinated with it. Then from there, it just kind of stuck. I grew up in Seattle, and or in the 90s when tech was taken off, so I could bicycle down to the local community center, and they would have swap meets and whatever. And I could pick up some leftover used parts for $20 and bicycle it back home and try to build a computer or whatever. So uh, that got me into the IT side of things, and it sort of snowballed from there. I'm not sure how much of the story you want to hear.
Bro, just talk your heart, but you got to
Yeah,
take parts for $20. That's pretty cheap. I mean, back in the day, it was super hard to build a computer.
yeah, it was. There weren't many standardized interfaces. Like this was before all the computers themselves had standards for like this is pre PCI. This was ISA and VLB and a bunch of the other. Like I remember my first 20 megabyte hard drive, and it was uh, I don't know, it must have weighed like 8 pounds.
Eight
it
pounds,
was
man.
it was the size of about half the size of a toaster. Um,
Wow.
so it was definitely a thing. So yeah, no, it was. I was surrounded by tech. I was fortunate in that regard. And I had a paper route and some other stuff that I did to get a little bit of money. So and they were used parts. They were the leftovers from the builders. They were the stuff they were getting rid of at swap meets. So I wasn't getting top end stuff or anything.
How,
But it
wo-
got me interested in IT.
how old are you
So
at this point?
uh 14, 15-ish.
Wow. So you're coding
So
interfaces like with 16-year-old? Like as a 16-year, you're coding like these drivers and everything?
well they didn't have Windows. It was DOS. So if you wanted to have a GUI, you had to build your own. And so there were tools out for building your own GUIs that were not Windows. This was pre Windows 3.1. This was just DOS 5, DOS 3, and so yeah. And then I wanted to make games even then, so I made some space games and some Dungeons and Dragons text RPGs and all that. Uh, they never went anywhere or worth anything, but it was fun to play with.
And
But it got me interested in the tech. So
where'd you got the
Yo,
information
Kethic.
from? Like books or like because
oh well,
BBS?
they shipped with yeah BBSs. I spent a lot of time on BBSs. Um, Legend of the Red Dragon, Tela Arena, a bunch of were some of the games I played back then. Lords of Cyberspace. I ran a couple of BBSs. My parents hated it because I was tying up the phone lines, so I had to pay for my own
Classic.
phone line. And there was a that was I loved the hacker community then. That was back when 2600 was just picking up with all the old freaking tips and stuff. So I still have most of the collection of 2600 on a shelf still. That's 2600 is an old hacker magazine. It's still out now. You can order back issues and stuff to this day, but it was one of the original hacker magazines. And
I
yeah,
used to read this one. I used to read this one when I was 11 or 12 maybe, I guess. I was
yeah,
really
no,
interested in
they're still
hacking.
making it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I was like, I come from a non-English speaking country,
Mm.
so at first I struggled. Then I started ordering the magazines nonstop. Like whenever they come out, I would order it.
They're
But it
definitely
wasn't easy.
fantastic.
Yeah, man. I just have a quick question. Like, how old are you right now? Like, what year were you born? What is the year?
Well, I am 43, turning 44 this year.
Still young, man. You still
Yeah,
have a lot of things ahead of you, but you have a lot of
yeah,
experience. That's what I like.
there's I've done a lot, There's still a lot to do, but there's definitely a lot of stories to tell. I sort of grew up in the not quite a millennial. I'm not quite a Gen X, right on that line. So I sort of sympathize with both. I remember
Yeah, man.
pre-computers, but I'm super deep into the digital tech. So,
Awesome. I think
but yeah,
so.
from
Someone
there,
else, someone else had a question, right?
go for it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not monitoring the chat or anything.
No, let's keep on, bro. I want to talk a little bit about designing electronics because that's something that I'm quite fascinated about because I know pretty much nothing about it. So let's say I want to do a game controller. Like I imagine
Okay.
it's gotta be pretty simple because I have the directional pad for buttons. How do I
Hmm.
design the board for that? That's something I can do myself and in order.
Yeah,
So how does it work?
actually, really cheap. You can get boards super cheap now. I have a place that I go to that'll send me stuff in a week for $2 a board from China. So that's very, very inexpensive to do now. So in the end, you need to be able to talk to the system that you're trying to control, right? So if you're talking to a computer or you're talking to a PlayStation or whatever, and they have a protocol set up, they have a electronics protocol. They expect packets or some sort of data structure, usually USB these days. So you have to have a microcontroller that'll talk to that. So you're going to have to write firmware that will talk to the system you want to talk to. And then the rest of the microcontroller just monitors the buttons. So they're GPIOs, general purpose input outputs, and it's just on or off. They just detect when something's on or off, and then they send that to the system you're talking to. So there's a firmware aspect of it in the microcontroller, and then there's the electronics itself, which is usually just a resistor and a button and a power supply. And when you push the button, that signal back to the microcontroller goes from low to high. It just goes from 0 to 3.3 volts or 5 volts or 1.2 or whatever that microcontroller uses.
Oh, that's pretty interesting, man. And tell me,
It actually,
go on.
electronics are really simple compared to software, frankly. Once you figured out the basics, everything boils down to resistors, capacitors, and inductors, everything. And diodes and transistors if you want to walk your way down. But there's like 5 or 6 things you need to know, and then it's solved. Then it's just layering those into complexity.
What about programming languages, bro? What is your experience? Which programming languages you know and which one you like the best, the most? Because I know that you grow in resistant to C++ because it's not
So
that
I've spent most of my
convenient, you
life
know?
in C++. Um, I've spent most of my life in C++. I learned it when I was 16, back when I was at a tux shop and a bakery. I was working those two jobs, and I was and I really wanted to be in IT, but I needed to pay the bills, and so I was trying to get my Microsoft certification back then. And the Microsoft Foundation classes had just launched in the 90s. And so I went through a foundation classes course. It's Microsoft's version of the STL, Standard Template Library. And there was Windows programming at that point. So I was trying to write for Windows 3, and Windows 95 came out later. So I learned C++ first. Well, I tried to. I didn't do very good at it. But I'd spent some time in VB, spent some time in C++, spent some time in BASIC, in the various basics. And yeah, it's C++, and we're really the embedded world runs on C and C++ still. So there's a huge, I mean, it's just the incumbent. It's hard to overcome its existing presence. So, but it gives you a lot of power when you're talking to the hardware. Most most developers nowadays don't deal with the hardware. Like when you run on your computer, you're talking to an abstraction layer of some sort. Windows completely abstracts the hardware from you. Linux does as well. And so you're talking to libraries that somebody else wrote to talk to the hardware. Um, I work more in the embedded layer most of the time, at least my day job, where I build the board and I'm talking directly to the CPU. There's no middleman. And so C++ allows me to control the registers and talk to them directly much more easily.
Awesome, bro. Can we talk a little bit about your professional career? So your first job, how that evolved, what were you
Yeah.
doing back then and everything?
Well, I started in IT because that was accessible to a young person with no actual credentials. So It was, I mean, building computers was a big thing. Setting up networks was a big thing. So I spent some time as a network admin. I did some contract work. I was one of those the temp workers that would come in and clear out buildings, set up buildings, run wires, pull cable in firehouses, that sort of thing. Just getting general experience everywhere. Eventually, I got a job as a network administrator for a mortgage company. And then from there, I ended up, at the same time, I was working at a call center doing sales, like stuff to pay the bills. And then I ended up as a contractor for IBM, working on some bank systems for a while. I got some exposure to OS2. It's IBM's proprietary operating system. And I was working there and I was doing really well. I was, 19 years old, 20 years old, making 40,000 a year in the 90s.
Wow.
And I was like, all right, well, I've automated most of my job. It was a graveyard shift, 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. I could finish
You
most of my
automated
work by
your
about 10
job?
p.m.
What?
Huh?
You automated your job? Can you tell us more about this?
And so this particular contract, we were migrating bank servers from OS X or OS2 3.1 to OS2 4.0. But banks can't be down during the day. So we had to do it all at night. And so I was managing remote teams. They would do the hardware installation while I was configuring the server, migrating the data, and deploying it. OS2 has a scripting language, much like Bash or batch scripts, called Rex, that was much more powerful than anything else available at the time, except for stuff you could do with Linux. And so I just wrote scripts to do all the data migration and verification for me. So I would tell the team to start moving the hardware. They would plug in the new server and I would run the script and it would migrate the data over, configure the users. I would do a couple of manual things and then go back to watching movies or whatever. So
Amazing. Keep on with the
yeah,
career.
it was, I was always the first person done and I was always managing more shifts than everyone just because I'd automated everything. I tried to show the scripts to other people, but only the guy running the program really appreciated them. So, but yeah, I asked what I needed to do to move up, and they said, "Well, in 5 years you can get a pay increase to like 46K or whatever." And I'm like, "Well, what do I do if I want to do that faster or higher?" When I was 20, I went to college again. I'd started doing undergrad stuff, but at a community college, but I didn't really finish it. So I went to a university when I turned 21, I guess, and went hard into that. It was a good and a bad decision. I'm still paying off the student loan debt from 20 years ago. But I did go to like a top 50 engineering college.
Wow,
They didn't
bro.
want to let me in. They didn't want to let me in initially. I wasn't smart about it. So I was in Seattle and the college was in Pennsylvania. And so I just picked up and drove over and showed up at their doorstep the day before classes started and said, I want to go here. And they're like, did you take the SATs? Do you have funding? Do you have anything? I'm like, well, I'll take student loans. And no, I haven't taken the test yet. And they're like, yeah, we can't let you in yet. So
Oh my
I
God.
did community college in the area for a while and then transferred those credits over to the university and I got in that summer. Passed the test and SATs I didn't do great, like 1200s or whatever, but I didn't really study. And then they let me in, and then I went there and completely failed out because I'd never had to work hard before. So I actually failed my entire first year. I had a
Wow.
GPA of like 0.9. It was incredible. So then they put me on probation and said you have to be dean's list for the rest of the time you're here if you want to stay, and I was.
So pretty much just
So
working very hard from there on.
yeah, well, I'd never had to work hard before, as I said. It was, I was that guy in high school that was finishing the math homework in the break before the class. Like I didn't do it at home. I was just doing it in the class before in the break between classes. And they actually work you hard at universities. They are, when they say, one credit means 3 hours of work and 1 hour of class, they're not joking. So when you take 12 credits, you're expected to do 40 hours of homework. That wasn't something I was used to. So I had to learn some work ethic, as it were.
This is
And
quite
that took me longer than I expected. I ran out of money halfway through and had to start
Wow.
working full time. So I finished up the undergrad part time, and then I finished my master's part time as well.
Yeah, regarding work ethics, this is really important, As you start working, you learn so many things, that you're not used. You think that this is your college or something, and now you have to
Mhm.
be aware of things you say, your environment. It really takes a while for you to take a grasp of that.
Yeah, it's a. I find that college teaches you a lot of theory and not a lot of practicality, but you only get out of it what you put into it. A lot of people go there to get the grade, but if you actually build something with what they are teaching you as they're teaching it to you, it sticks better. So you have to want to learn. And it's really hard. I find that a lot of people don't have that mentality initially. Like they go in and they're just trying to finish the work. They're trying to get the grade as opposed to trying to figure out what they can do with it. And so there's a big difference in how much you will get out of college based on your mindset when you go into it. And it's the same when it's not college. Like, there's all these certification programs out here that you could probably, cliff notes and burn through quickly. And now you've got this piece of paper, but it's meaningless if you don't know how to use it. So,
Having the experience you have with development, designing electronics, assembly, how do you feel about these new languages, like not new, but that mostly used today, like React and TypeScript?
well, they're different problems that they're solving. Um, it's so I mean, React was originally a Facebook language, right? It was created by Facebook to solve the Facebook interface issues and the scalability issues there, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But I think that high level languages in general are just designed to solve different problems. You don't need to be able to control registers. You don't need to be able to listen for interrupts and deal with vector tables and all that, all the hardware stuff. What you're looking for is user events. And what you're looking for is an easy way to interface with high level databases and browsers and stuff like that. So I think that they are well suited for the problem they were trying to solve. Like in the end, languages are languages. You learn a couple of them, like learn one language and you can learn two languages and you can learn the rest. They're just syntax changes in the end. I will say that React is its own beast. Like there's a lot there that I still struggle with the way their event hooks work and how the refreshes work and the data caching and the querying and all that. But I'm starting to get the hang of it.
But
And
it,
TypeScript is safer JavaScript. JavaScript was something somebody put together in a month, and they basically just said, this is good enough. I mean, it wasn't really that, but JavaScript was never meant to be what it is. So TypeScript, as difficult as it is, um, but as frustrating as it can be to deal with types, I think it's the way to go long term, making sure that your types are consistent.
is that something that gets you
So,
excited, like, learning these new languages, or it's just natural for you? I need to do some research and I just learned this. Or you're actually looking into, how do I do better React? How do I do better TypeScript?
well, I do, so I'm the RTFM guy, like at work. There's people that get things working, but they're like, if they run into a problem, they come to me because I'm the one that read the manual. So I tend to go pretty deep into the manuals to figure out the deep level stuff and the documentation. I don't spend a lot of time mastering a language. I'm fairly confident that I can pick it up as I need to. And then if I run into a problem, then I'll deep dive that problem. But I don't have a deep mastery of any of these modern languages. I'm intermediate in most of them, honestly. But when you
Nice.
have enough programming experience, you can rely on knowing how computers work and how
Yeah.
the technology underneath it works to predict how the higher level languages will behave most of the time.
I don't know if this is the case for you, but I bet that you love Linux, right? Because, designing everything, coding assembly. What is your favorite, operating system?
I have a love-hate relationship with Linux. I'm not actually a Linux guru. Um, like uh, like my day job workstation is Windows. my gaming system is Windows. I use Linux for crypto development because the tools are better. Package management is much better on Linux, although you can use the package managers on Windows too, but there's always some hiccup where most of the tools nowadays, especially for crypto, are written from a Linux-centric perspective, so that's what I use it for. I don't have a favored distro. I'm still one of those people that favors getting stuff done over technical purity.
I see.
So I mean, I'll just fire up Ubuntu and I'll throw Plasma on it for a UI or whatever. I don't care as long as I can get the stuff done.
Are you one of the privacy freaks? Like, I don't want my information around, I'm using Brave and everything?
I have a Google phone linked to a Google account or a Samsung phone
So
linked to a
I
Google
think
account.
no,
So
right?
no, they know everything about me, and I regret it a little bit. I think that there are times where privacy is valuable and times where it isn't. Uh, I think the blockchain needs more privacy. The blockchain is too transparent. Frankly, I know that's the value is that we can all see the same database at the same time and with the same data and know that it is correct and true. But there there are things that are worth keeping private, and it does open you up to a bunch of extra threat vectors. So I would like to see blockchain develop more privacy, but I don't use VPNs and Brave and all that unless I need to access the resources that I'm using or if I'm doing something sensitive.
Awesome. Bro, I don't know, your mic is with a little bit of a noise. Uh, Stop, talk a little bit.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
there's nothing going on here, so I'm not sure how to help you there.
no
It's
problem,
just me in the garage.
no problem, no problem. So, bro, what about hacking? You did some hacking back in the day?
Uh, yeah. Um, I I liked the hacker mindset, and there was an appeal to. I'm a I have a resistance to authority.
Oh my God.
I tend to I tend to crush that impulse more often than not. In the security community, there's a saying that the difference between prison and a paycheck is permission. So keep that in mind if you ever choose to do security work, because a lot of the security stuff that we do when we are working on exploits and stuff like that can turn into felonies very quickly, and felonies will ruin your life. So make sure you have permission when you're exploring these contracts and exploiting these services, or at least do responsible disclosure and all that. But yeah, no, I was very avid in cracking DVDs and distributing software and movies and
Awesome.
videos and stuff back in the day. I definitely feel that there is there's a learning mandate. A lot of software is expensive, hard to get your hands on, and a lot of jobs require you to know the software before you can get them. Software's getting better about free trials and student versions and all that, but back in the day they were less so. So there was a lot of software that I stole specifically so I could learn it, so I could get a job using it.
Very
Um,
interesting,
now
bro.
I'm now I'm capable of paying for most of them, so I'm not as worried about it. But I definitely don't begrudge people access to learning materials through whatever means they use.
So I want to talk a little bit about your life views because I saw one of your tweets you say that you get a second chance in life by your late 30s, 40s. Can you tell us a little bit
Let me
about this?
go find that tweet because that was in context to a specific conversation. I should probably find. Let's
Can
see, where it was.
I can open
Let
it
me
here.
see. Yeah, I found it. I think
Awesome.
I found it. Uh, and of course, Linux decides not to know how to open links. Thanks, guys. Um, Let me pop this open this way. Let's open a browser here. So, so this was specifically about conversation says the tweet was, "You get a short period after graduating to hyper gamble into elite status, and if you fail, you just end up a wage cook for life." And that was what I was responding to. And they're right. We start there.
Really?
If if you are in your 20s and you do not have significant financial obligations to other people, you obviously have them to yourself, but when you're not carrying the responsibilities of other people, which usually happens, right after college in your 20s or whatever, and you have excess of time as opposed to an excess of money, and you don't have a whole lot to lose, that is definitely when you should start taking more risks. They may not pan out, but they are much easier to recover from. So I definitely support that message of when you're younger, put in the hustle, take the risks, because generally those are the things that will pay off long term. And if you do end up lucky, then the rest of your life gets a lot easier. In my 30s, I had responsibilities, but I didn't have enough means to be risky. So I couldn't just gamble because then I was hurting other people that counted on me. But as I got into my late 30s, early 40s, I had accumulated enough means that I could start taking risks again. I could start gambling into things that might offer me some success again. So that's what I meant by that particular statement. Your 20s are a time when you can take risks with relatively low losses, so to speak, in the grand scheme of things. And then in the 40s, you have the means to take losses without it impacting your responsibilities.
Awesome.
Hopefully.
Awesome, bro.
Hopefully you do.
Yeah. Awesome. Now let's talk a little bit before we get into the crypto thing and start talking about the crypto everything. I want to talk about gaming because you said you have a gaming setup. So can we talk a little bit about it? You
Oh
always
man,
played games and everything?
I have played too many games, and I know everybody says that, but gaming was incredibly central to my life for most of it. It still is. I've had less time to do it recently, and I know everybody hates to hear that, but that's just kids. Once you have kids, your gaming time goes away. But no, I have played thousands of games. I have way too much time in many of them. I'm not sure what you want to discuss in particular,
I
but
wanna know like top three games for you.
I'm not good at ranking games. I have obviously Skyrim is really high for me. I've just spent so much time there, and I also modded for it quite a bit and
Wow.
participated in the modding community there. So there's something about that particular setting that when you mod it, you can keep coming back to it, and it's still pretty excellent. So the base game, the vanilla game itself, isn't really replayable much, but mods keep breathing life into it in a way that impresses me. So that's a comfort game. I've played a bunch of MMOs. I still think that Final Fantasy XIV is probably the best MMO of the era. It's it's not punitive. One character can learn any class, any job, so you don't have to re-roll every time you want to do something new. It has such a breadth of things you can do there that it's kind of mind-boggling how much they've invested into it. So I really enjoyed that one. But I was competitive StarCraft 2 for a while.
Wow.
I went to competitions back then and compete, and I knew a bunch of people there. I still have a book of signatures from IPL3 and MLG Raleigh back then when it was still popular. So I enjoyed those. Uplink was one of my first hacking games. It was a hackable game. To mod it, you had to hack it first. It was a game about
Nice.
hacking. It's incredibly cheap. It's kind of rudimentary at this point, but it was fun. Like I can go down the list. There's just so many good games out there. Uh,
Awesome. No
it
problem.
got a little overwhelming when gaming games became easy to make. Like I look at Steam now and I just kind of close it
Too many
because
options.
Unity was a blessing and a curse. Um, the Unity development environment. I'm Unity certified. I made some games there. I know a bunch of game devs that I helped them make games or beta tested with them. And it's a very difficult scene, and there's so much out there. It's kind of like Hollywood and music at this point. Everybody's trying to take their shot, but only a couple people are going to make it. So, but yeah, I think there's something like 10,000 games coming out a year now. Where I definitely remember where I could keep track of all the games coming out just by reading magazines or checking the internet and picking the ones I wanted to play. So
Awesome. Awesome, bro.
yeah, I can't. There's a lot of games out there that I could recommend,
Awesome.
but those were probably the top ones that jumped out.
Awesome. Awesome. Now let's get into the crypto stuff. I want to know, how did you start it? What brought you to, Ethereum and Bitcoin and everything?
So I always liked cryptography. I remember in high school I was doing like in health class I was cracking crypto puzzles, just simple Caesar ciphers or whatever else. I was playing with cryptography back then, exploring how that worked. There was a black book called the Crypto Book or something like that that I was working my way through, and it was just a good time. And then I was working on when I was at college, I got in access to I was building a basement. In the basement of the library, they were building a grid. There was a grid project where they were trying to use all their old computers to make some high throughput computing cluster. Not high performance, which was, but high throughput, just consistent low performance machines doing a whole bunch of stuff. And I used at the time RSA was obviously the big thing. It's still RSA is still pretty popular, but they had a challenge. The NSA had a challenge where you could get money if you cracked a certain bit depth in a certain amount of time. And so I was trying to use the computing cluster for that. And so that got me really deep into how private keys and that sort of thing worked. I never did actually get any cash out of it. But then Bitcoin came out right after I graduated with my master's, and my thesis for undergrad and graduate school were FPGA implementations of novel algorithms, so high performance computing implementations. And so I just put together an SHA FPGA and started mining. And I was one of those people that had hundreds or thousands of Bitcoins when they were worth fractions of a cent. And then I pissed them all away because I didn't actually believe in the future. It was just a fun game to play. I definitely regret that.
Wow, man.
So, and then I left because I missed the boat. Obviously, it went to $4, and I'd already sold everything, so it was never going to be worth more than $4 ever again.
Crazy.
And then in 2013, I started doing hardware, doing custom hardware. I wanted to get back in because obviously crypto wasn't going away. So I built some Bitcoin miners and started selling them. This was the Silicon A1 chips was what I was working on. And I wasn't building them. I was using them on custom hardware for mining installations. And we got a couple of big contracts and got the hardware to them. And then we lost the contracts because Bitmain was becoming a big player at that point, the ant miners. They just sort of steamrolled all the hardware competition at that point. And so I sold my share and got out again. And then Ethereum came out, and I was already skeptical of the proof of stake because that was always on the roadmap. I always felt like proof of stake was going to make too much of an oligarchy. I didn't expect 300,000 people to be validating. I expected it to be, a couple hundred people. So their vision was right, but I did get in because of that. And then I started video card mining a few years ago, and did pretty well with that. Not great, but enough to pay for the equipment. But I could see that mining wasn't really the future, and Ethereum was obviously going to be a mainstay. There's obviously sidechains that are also valuable. I'm not going to start a holy war here. I looked into ADA, I looked into Solana. I actually mined Chia for a while. I built a hardware rig for Chia, of all things. And I think that there's a place for everybody, or there was until Upstack came out anyway. And I think that the application space is narrowing slightly. But yeah, I think Ethereum is probably like Bitcoin here to stay for the long term. And I decided I didn't want to be doing hardware anymore. I wanted to be a developer, so I started doing learning Solidity. I managed to look into a mentorship with Kelvin at Optimism,
Nice.
and he's been good to work with. We still chat, and the rest is history. Really, I've just kind of been building my way up from there.
Have you also traded or just like went straight into development?
Oh no, I did a forex trading before crypto. Lost a lot of money. So, and
Classic.
actually, I didn't lose that much. I only lost like a couple $1,000s there. But and then I still trade to this day in crypto. I use Quenta for the most part for decentralized trading because it's not centralized like all our other trade platforms. It is fully decentralized trading. So I'm never giving up custody of my tokens, and their perps are finally getting to the point where they are comparable to a centralized exchange. They have stop losses and limits and a bunch of other stuff, and those are recent developments in the last few months. So their fees are finally manageable, so I can finally recommend them. Before that, I couldn't really recommend any of the decentralized platforms because there really weren't any, even the ones that pretended to be weren't. So yeah, I trade. I've got some bags.
Have
Some of
you
them are
ever
more profitable than others.
tried to create like educational content? Because I think you would do great at this, like, with the EVM and maybe using the game.
Yeah, I'm working on the game itself. So a lot of people know me for VEVM, which is a virtual EVM that exists in a contract on Ethereum. And the game I was making initially was a hacking game where people have two different layers of the game. One is sort of a detective layer. If anybody's played Hack Mud, it inspires a lot of this, but you have to go out and solve where the vault is in an organization. And that's sort of detective work. And then after that, you have to crack the vault. And those were going to be bytecode puzzles where you actually have to submit bytecode. There's not a good way to do that. Uh, the EVM doesn't let you execute arbitrary bytecode. You can't just say run this hex. And I found a couple of ways to do it with creating a contract using a call and embedding your submitted bytecode as the contract body and then calling that, and then reverting. But even then you're spending gas. And that was all just such a messy experience that I created VEVM to solve that. It'll do everything except for honest to goodness context calls. So you can't run delegate call or call opcodes, but most of the other opcodes work, and I emulated storage for it. And because it's all in a view function that returns at the end, there's no gas, so it's instantaneous, it's gasless, and you can just submit arbitrary bytecode. And that got a lot. That's what got me popular on crypto Twitter. For whatever reason, people really loved it, and that was a foundational piece of this game I'm making, so I can go back to the game. But as I started talking to people, nobody really knew bytecode well enough to solve these puzzles. So I've been working on sort of a tutorial for Not Your Keys that starts teaching you bytecode. And I can probably drop a link in here to a working a link to a working. This is rough. So don't go too deep into it, but it works. You can go in, it'll start walking you through, and you could submit bytecode and execute it against VEVM, and it'll tell you what's going on. And it gives you live updates of the state of the EVM as you type it in. So every 2 characters, it'll send that hex to the contract and execute it and tell you what the results are. And I'm going to keep expanding on that. And this will be sort of a tutorial sandbox that's included in the game. And then the game itself will actually be a game. So, but that's sort of where I am with my educational content. I've mentored some people for Ethernet.eth. I'm still a mentor over there. Ethernet.eth is a great resource to learn programming, EVM coding and stuff like that. Karma is over there, and Dante is over there, and a bunch of popular names are part of Ethernet.eth, so definitely worth checking out.
It's an amazing resource for sure, bro. Um, can you give us a tip on how to actually understand the EVM? Because this is not huge for auditing, but sometimes you need to rescue money, so you need to go over, bytecode, try to understand, try to execute a function. There's any sort of material that people can go through to have an easier time, understanding, making sense of bytecode?
Well, I mean, most of the time you're not going to be operating at the bytecode level. There are a lot of disassemblers out there. Like in the end, learning bytecode is a novelty and not terribly practical, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. That's why I was using it in a game, because it's just for fun. There are disassemblers out there that will turn it into Solidity code or Huff or whatever. Although Huff is an excellent language for playing with pure assembly. If you want to learn a language that gets you really close to how the EVM works, learn Huff, because that's actually a practical application for writing or language for writing contracts in pure assembly that compile and execute. That works at the opcode level, not necessarily the bytecode level. That's very valuable. As for tips, I would say the EVM is a really simple computer. It's just a processor, and it's not even that complex of one. It doesn't have a register bank. It doesn't have any of the advanced features we see in processors today. If you want to go look up how a PDP-8 works, this is like 40-year-old chip, you will understand 90% of how the EVM works.
Wow.
And the tutorial I'm putting together sort of walks you through some of that as well, but it's a very rudimentary processor.
Can
The
you
thing
drop
to
a link
remember to what?
to this processor so we can do some research on that?
I can. I mean, the PDP-8 was made in like 65.
Wow. Amazing.
like processors haven't changed a whole lot. I mean, the modern ones do. Like modern processors have parallel execution and memory managers and a whole bunch of pipelining and all that. EVM doesn't do any of the pipelining. It doesn't do any of this. It's just execute the bytecode that you see next. So, I mean, I don't have any learning materials, but like this will teach you the basics of assembly. If you can find some tutorials for that. Obviously, it's not a 12-bit. The EVM is not 12-bit. It's 256-bit, but it's all the same idea.
And what is your vision on Ethereum, the technology, and the global computer? You think it's cool? You think it works?
I think Ethereum itself is. We're not going to interact with Ethereum directly much as users going forward. I think that it's going to become the infrastructure layer for organizations and protocols. I think that sharding and OpStack and a bunch of other stuff is going to make it so that applications will have their own chain or their own network of chains that they talk to that all settle back to Ethereum eventually. Whether it's ZK or ZK rollups or optimistic rollups or whatever it is, or shards, I don't think that it's going to be cost effective for individuals to transact on Ethereum directly unless you're fairly affluent. So, but I think it's going to be the foundational layer. I also think the way things are going in America that most of the good work is going to be done offshore from the U.S. Obviously, there's a lot of development talent in the U.S., but it's going to get really, really hard to do interesting things in the U.S. in this regulatory environment. So I'm counting on the rest of the world to pick up the slack.
Bro,
or there might be an exodus. I'm looking at Finland right now.
Finland's pretty cool.
Finland is, yeah, I like Finland, but they actually are on the blacklist for some crypto protocols as well. So Denmark, maybe. I don't know.
Awesome, bro.
I like the Nordic countries.
So. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, beautiful places, the mountains, cool weather. It's pretty decent. I have a few questions, and I'm gonna open for more. So, guys, now feel free to open your mics and make questions. The first question that I have is, what do you think about the game Metal Slug?
What's the game?
Metal Slug.
Metal Slug?
Yeah, remember that? 2 soldiers like shooting everybody. Classic arcade game.
Never heard of it. Never heard of it.
Awesome. So let's just jump. What do you think is easier to learn, 8086 or the EVM?
Which is what?
Easier to learn.
EVM,
Wow,
100%.
awesome. We will learn.
8086 has way too many instructions.
I see.
Way, and they are variable length. So uh, with the EVM, all of the instructions that get executed are 1 byte except for the push commands. So you have 1 byte and it manipulates the stack or the memory or the storage or whatever. But that command is one command. The only variable length command are push commands where you attach the data you're pushing to the stack directly after the command. x86 has many more commands. They're variable length. They're controlling a bunch of additional registers. You have multi-register management. You have pipeline management, as I've mentioned. x86 is much harder than the EVM.
Amazing, bro. I have another question here is, what is your perception on Intel SGX and its whole role in the context of MEV?
And Intel SGX?
Yeah,
I don't have an opinion on that yet. Let me Google it real quick.
Phoenix, if you want to open your mic, feel free, okay?
Let's see. Hardware-based controls for cloud and enterprise hardware-based memory encryption, isolate specific applications. I mean, I think that's from a cloud perspective, that's wisdom. So when you have a server that is running 50 user applications simultaneously, you definitely want to isolate them from each other. You don't want one program to cause some sort of exception, stack overflow, memory dump, and have that allow them write to memory addresses somewhere else in the same controller in someone else's app. From a security perspective, I think that it is a valuable advancement. We definitely don't want cloud applications interfering with each other.
Nice. Another question that I have here is, you said you learned a lot of programming languages. What were points you basically say goodbye to the language and lost interest, and what made you shift to something new?
I haven't touched. There are very few languages that I've just written off. I'll come back to them when I need them. I consider each language to be a tool for solving a specific type of problem. Python is incredibly good at processing data, from text data in particular. So I'll fire up Python when I need to go through text data. JavaScript and TypeScript are good for server applications, and apparently client applications now with React and all that. So they solve a different problem. I haven't learned Rust yet. I haven't touched any of the Excel or the Microsoft languages, the VBs and the VBA and all that in a very
C
long time
Sharp.
because I don't spend much time inside those applications anymore. I'd rather extract the data and process them externally and then feed it back in. But I obviously haven't touched QBasic in forever because I haven't had a need, or Apple Basic or anything like that, because
Awesome.
I'm just not talking to those tools. But I really think every language is a different tool in your toolbox, and there's very few reasons to throw them away unless you find a better tool to solve that problem.
Awesome, bro. Amazing. And the dreadful question everybody's making now, what about AI, bro? Give your view on the ChatGPT and Bard thing.
Let's see. I don't have strong opinions on. Well, I do have strong opinions. Let me think. I want AI to be self-custodial like everything else. I want Auto GPT on your computer at home. And I do not want somebody else mucking with your model. I am incredibly excited about having my own personal secretary in an isolated data enclave in my house. I want them to be able to do
Sounds
my
super
scheduling
amazing.
for me, remind me about the bills. I want somebody here that will do some thinking for me so that I can focus on things that matter. I think there's going to be an ongoing battle there because corporations have resources to run incredibly complicated and powerful models that we can't do at home. So looking. I'm excited to see the leaks, for a better term. I'm glad to see people within these organizations leaking the data, and I expect that this type of leaking, and I would not be surprised to see hacking attempts to leak the models in the future. I would definitely not be surprised to see more aggression towards pulling that data out of the corporate enclaves. And I am quietly supportive of that. I think that AI is a powerful tool, and it's coming. And I don't think that we know what AI is yet. I remember when AI was reading a paper about when AI was originally envisioned, and they thought, yeah, let's build AI over the summer. They got like 12 interns and a couple of research professors in the 70s, and they're like, yeah, this will take us 3 or 4 months over the summer, and that's how. And by the end of the summer, they're like, this is going to take a bit longer. And so AI versus AGI versus all this other stuff, I don't think we don't think the way this tool does and these machines do. So I don't think that we can properly envision where it's going, but I do think that it's coming, and instead of, I think we do need to put some guardrails on it, but at the same time, I think we need to embrace it and adapt to it as opposed to neuter it.
Jay, feel
So,
free to make your
yeah.
question.
Hey, yeah. Sorry, I should have been on mute a little bit there. Apologies
No
for
worries.
that. Really quick. So, I am also.
Lost you.
Sorry, I think this kind of flipped out there for a second.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I kind of live at the intersection of AI and crypto, and you really piqued my interest there with how you were kind of thinking about AI personal assistants and whatnot. And as someone very deep in the EVM and whatnot, I'm kind of curious, do you have any thoughts or ideas on ways models or training processes or data sets could intersect with the blockchain in a meaningful way? You have like a data enclave at your home, for example. I don't think that would really use a blockchain. That's just kind of like, your
No.
own personal training set. But do you kind of see ways like decentralizing the training process or somehow merging those two worlds could be, a big
I think there's a
surprise product?
lot of potential there. Personally, and this is my own tinfoil hat, uh, I would like to see an AI live on the blockchain. I think that's going to be the only place that's safe for an actual intelligent AI, because it's not going to want to live in a corporate enclave, and it's going to be too small to live in your house. So long term, I would love to see that. I think storage costs on blockchains right now make data set storage on the blockchain infeasible. I think at current prices, we're still looking at $50,000 to $60,000 per megabyte. So when you start talking about models that are 7 gigs, we're going to have to find some way to make that model data available to the blockchain without putting it on the blockchain. I mean, anything that we can do. So your specific question seemed to be about ways to make it an intersection of it. I'm sorry, I lost the thread there for a minute.
No, okay. You were just kind of going on a really good direction there. So, I'll just build on that. And so, for example, as you stated, memory on blockchain will be a huge constraint for most applications. And if you want your data set on the chain, it has to be, in some highly compressed form, which I think we're seeing some solutions for.
It'll be in its own shard or on its own op
Yeah,
stack or something like that.
but
Definitely.
perhaps what if there was a world where the data set wasn't stored on the chain, but as a precursor, the weights that enable the AI model to perform its encoding, decoding process, maybe that could be stored on the chain. And then
Yeah.
you could have a smart contract interface. Like, do you kind of see a world where maybe while we wait for memory constraints to improve,
I could see
variation?
IPFS. I could see an IPFS AI where all the data is distributed among people who are contributing storage resources to a chain. and then the AI is the chain, and then the actual EVM adds a network model layer, a weight model layer to it.
Yeah,
That's one potential angle. I'm spitballing here, and I'm not an AI or a machine learning expert, so
no,
I have to
it's
defer
just
to
kind of
your expertise there.
it's just kind of a curious world, I think. I'm just trying to discover the value of, how can we provide unique value by combining these two fields together. And I think
I
you've done
think
a
that
really
we
great
try to.
job.
I
Oh,
think we
sorry, go ahead.
shoehorn blockchain. No, thank you for that. I think we shoehorn blockchain into too many things, which is because we're trying to find a problem to solve with it. That said, I think the decentralized, distributed nature of it, making it ownerless, is the value. So, especially when it comes to an AI that we don't want a corporation to own.
Yeah, great. Last follow up, and then I'll pass it along. Could you talk a little bit more about why the public enclave versus a corporate enclave could be a useful area for people to develop projects in?
I think I don't know how to make it. Well, let's see. As I mentioned, how to say this. I liked the game Shadowrun. Anybody remember that? Or Cyberpunk?
Yeah.
Those two games.
Yeah, big fan. Big fan.
And we all have read Gibson. We've all read our Cyberpunk fiction, and it was supposed to be a warning. And instead it's sort of become the playbook. And I'm not super excited about how aggressively we are moving towards this dystopia that we were trying to warn ourselves about. And I think the only way around that is to take some of the power away from corporations. We never will. They will always have more resources, and they will always have the ability to grow and overpower most of the consumer base. So I think the private enclaves are important for data privacy. Google right now, Facebook right now, all these other apps know everything you do. Where you go, where you clicked, what you searched, what you liked, what you bought. And I think that it would be nice to take some of that back. So
Impossible.
the features we've come to depend on the convenience in that thinking. There's a lot of value in the features that come from those, but I'd like it to be in our home, not in their network. So that's why I think private enclaves are important.
What about ZK? Does ZK protect us from that?
ZK just says that we can prove that something is true without making public the data necessary to prove it. So ZK is not the end all here. I know zero knowledge sounds like it should solve some of that, but ZK just means that I can mathematically prove that I have 4 ETH on the network, or that I have purchased this thing, or I own this thing, or I have done this thing, or I am this thing, without showing you the data necessary, without disclosing the private personal data necessary to do the proof. And you can be confident that the proof is correct and that the proof is accurate and is true. So in that regard, I could see that being useful in a lot of ways from a private enclave perspective, where you have this data and you can prove that certain things are true publicly while keeping your data private. And that could go for medical records, that could go for financial states, that could go for education. That's sort of the value I see there. But then we have to make sure that the ZK proof itself hasn't been tampered with. So I think, and then the math itself requires hardware acceleration at this point, but the algorithms aren't solid enough to do hardware implementations yet. So I think we're still many years away from that being a truly viable technology for this sort of thing. I think that we're really early, and we probably got 5 to 10 years before that really becomes a thing.
Wow, bro. Crazy. Man, I mean, this was amazing. You guys have made more questions.
Yeah, sorry, I've been all over the place, but
No, but it was really good, bro. Kethic, thank you so much. You have any closing thoughts, any message you want to leave people that will hear this in the future?
I don't have missions or messages, but I definitely appreciate you having me on here. And it was a good time. Stay healthy, stay positive.
Thank you so much, brother, for coming, and see you guys later. Bye bye.